What else is there? It's a peaceful life. Anything that disturbs that or distracts that, I need to get rid of it, little by little, because by the end of my life, I'll have to get rid of it for sure. So why not practice it now? Little by little. Okay. So, we left off by saying, Christ gives us the ability to become like Him, holy. But these saints did not achieve holiness overnight, right? So be patient with yourself. This is the part that people have a problem with. They say, I want to be more like Christ. I want to be peaceful. I want to be joyful. But it's not happening. Well, when did you start? I started 10 minutes ago, and it's not happening. This is, the Orthodox. We take, for us, 500 years is a short time. So be patient with yourself, and be patient especially with God and with other people. You want to practice? Practice with other people. God will grant you more and more and more of this gift as you progress. Absolutely. Let me share with you, I have one of my favorite little elders, not published in English. His name is Father Joel Giannakopoulos, and he has some little jewels that I just use every once in a while. I pull them out. Like this one's called Material Wealth and Spiritual Poverty. He was preaching this. He said, there are two kinds of goods, for instance, material and spiritual. While with the material goods, we do not see what we have, but what we lack. With the spiritual goods, we don't see what we lack, but what we have. No, don't do it like this. Do the opposite. With regard to material goods, don't see how much you lack and grumble, but how many you have, and glorify God for these things which His goodness gave you. And then with regard to the spiritual goods, the virtues, the joy and all the rest of the virtues, don't look at how many virtues you have and puff yourself up with pride, but how many you lack, and humble yourself with spiritual poverty. And in this way, you will richly gain the mercy of the Lord. Now just take that little teaching. It turns everything in our life upside down. The normal way we live is what he said. We look at our material goods and we say, oh, I need more, and with spiritual goods, I am the best. If you just do the opposite. And by the way, there's another teaching like this. Do you remember in the gospel where Christ says, you have to love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's talk about that part. It's similar to this. If you love your neighbor as yourself, that's often misinterpreted. I'll never forget one of my professors, Father Vladimir Borichevsky, God rest his soul. It was so fun to have him as a seminary professor because he would simply, it didn't matter what he was teaching. He taught Old Testament, he taught the canon law, history of the church in America. He taught every kind of subject, but it was all the same class. It was him telling stories. It was just Father Vladimir telling stories, and sometimes he'd be teaching us and he'd fall asleep, while he was teaching. And we would say, yes, but Father Vladimir, he'd joke up, and he just wouldn't miss a beat. He would just go right back to what he was saying. This was like the best class, because it was very orthodox. Not a bunch of, ideas, just stories. Anyway, he said one time they invited him on a panel. The world loves to put us on panels. They have a Roman Catholic, they have an Orthodox priest, they have a Jewish rabbi, they have Protestants, they have whatever. And this question came up, what does it mean, love your neighbor as yourself? And all the pastors, they're all giving their own answers. And Father Vladimir said, no. Our tradition teaches that when Christ says, love your neighbor as yourself, look how we love ourselves. We give everything to ourselves. We excuse ourselves, we forgive ourselves, we make every possible concession for ourselves. I'm too tired, make excuses, all the rest of it. He said, instead of this, why don't we give that to our neighbor? Why don't we give that to other people? And what do we normally give to other people? We judge them. We say, why did they do that? We criticize them. we look at them as if, like they're always doing something wrong. He said, instead of doing that, why don't we give that to ourselves? In other words, flip it around, turn it on its head, and be ruthless with yourself and be easy on other people. This is a very tried and true ancient Christian practice, to be ruthless with yourself and so easy with other people. And it's the opposite of the way we're living today, right? And when he was walking out from that panel, the Jewish rabbi actually stopped him and said, you know what? You're the first Christian I ever heard who interpreted that, because that was an old Jewish maxim too, that I ever heard interpret that correctly. Everybody else makes up some other crazy thing. To love your neighbor as yourself is to give the scraps to yourself, which we normally give them, and to give them the gold, which we normally give to ourselves. If you want real joy, to live like that, even if you try it for a month, try it, just try it. Your life will change. It cannot help but change if you live that way. Father John?
The thought that comes to my mind, what you brought up earlier, that, I mean, even from our young age, here in America, we're raised with the idea that we have to care for ourselves, we have to love ourselves, right? And it's like someone who's built in a like an addiction to alcohol, and you're gonna try to cut that off. I mean, it's like you're shaking, whatever you're going through. Anyone who's trying to cut any habit, I'm just thinking, like, to go through that process of, like, because so many people are on borderline depression, borderline all these mental health issues.
Yeah.
And now you're telling the church is telling people, give yourself the scraps and give the first and the best to everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's going to happen to a person?
Yeah, but first, before we do it, people have to be healed. The only way we find healing is what we're talking about here. You begin with love of God, love of Christ. If you can somehow open yourself up to the love of Christ, to really learning what that is, who he is, what he's done for us, this is the beginning of all healing, right? Anybody who has any kind of problem, psychological, addictions, everything that's troubling us, I don't know how anybody can get healed without Christ. Some self-help group, they all have a little nice kind of techniques that they use. But you have to have the real answer, the deep answer, which is the God who created you loves you so much that he doesn't want to see you killing yourself like this or throwing your life away like this. Do you believe that? And if people start believing that and can learn what that means and how they can translate that into their hearts, now they have the platform to begin the process. And that process then is the way God loves you is the way you can learn how to love other people. I'm going to tell you a story. I wasn't going to plan on this one, but... So I have a woman in my parish. Well, let me just say it like this. I had a catechumen, right, last year. And a beard, deep voice. My wife met him like he played in the same orchestra as she did. And he came to the church, and he was just very much, friendly, and he loved the church. And one time, very strangely, he said, "Why is everyone so kind to me? Why are you so kind to me at this church?" I said, "Well, this is our life. This is how Christ is. So we're trying to be like him. That's all. Nothing special." And then he said he wanted to keep coming back, and he wanted to start going to classes. So he started going to my catechumen class, and like about 9 months later, we finally got to the class that was talking about confession. And I was saying we have to go deep and don't leave any stone unturned, because the minute you get rid of the top level, which is always the really bad things that we've done in our life, sweep that away, and God will shed more light onto the next level, and then the next level, and then the next level. It's a series of going deeper by unfolding all the levels. You just scratched the surface the first time. So after the class, he says to me, "Father, do you think we can meet in the church real quick?" And I had just done a class, I'm like exhausted. But he said, "Please, I just need..." Okay, so we went in the church, and he says, How much time do you have? That's always a deadly question. How much time do you have? I said, well, what if we hit the high spots? Just so he says, okay. I was born a woman. Have you had that one before yet? No, good. Okay, this is going to be good then. I was born a woman, and so I've been a priest a long time, and I'm not usually surprised. But his name was Sam. I said, Sam, this one actually surprises me. So, oh my gosh, I said, let's talk. And during the first session, I said, I just want to hear, like, the family history. Like, what happened? Oh my gosh. Here's a family that messed up their daughter. Oh, the things that happened to her in her life. So I just listened. I didn't say a word, but I was listening to all the things. I said, let's meet again next week. And then the next week we met, I didn't say a word. I said, give me the history of the psychology. Like, what made you start moving in this direction that you wanted to do that? So we went through all of that. And I'm learning a lot because, this is not something you run into every day. The third time, I said, let's meet one more time. The third week, we talked about all the physical aspects, Thank God she never, they do sex change operations and all that. She never had like any kind of, and she's given me permission, by the way, to tell her story. It's that good. And she had a mastectomy. That's what but she never had any kind of like change, like surgery change otherwise. And then the hormones, they take hormones for that, like to make your voice deep and to make your beard grow and all of that. Okay, so she had stopped when she moved to Idaho. Idaho's it's not a state that you see that very much because she was living down in New Orleans, down in Louisiana when this happened. So she came to Idaho. So she simply stopped because you had to go somewhere, another state, to get treated or to get the hormones and all the rest. So she simply stopped. But then I got all the information, and I said, well, I'm going to have to take a chance here and say the first thing that I need to say. I said, Sam, you have to tell me one thing. You have to admit that you screwed up. You messed up. And she was like in tears. She says, of course I screwed up. I didn't know that all of this was possible. I never knew Christ. I never knew the church. I never knew the way I feel in this church. And I was trying to find an answer like somewhere else. She was trying to find an answer in the world, like in the created world. And when that's all you have, that's where you'll go for your answers. And it doesn't bring joy. It brings all kinds of harm. Because the more I started studying like these cases, how much suicide goes on, whether you have the sex change or not, how much suicide still happens. It's depression, it's despair based on a worldview which doesn't include the love of Christ. So that I came more and more to this as I was experiencing it. So I said, okay, now what will we do? We went to all the people in the church. I said, because you can't live a double life, like, you ready to fight this? She goes, yes, of course. So we went to all the people in the church, like one family at a time, and explained the whole situation. The whole community embraced her, So then once, I said, okay, take your time. You don't have to make like a transformation overnight. One Sunday or 1 week, she comes back, no beard. I said, oh, you shaved off your beard? She goes, no. Plucked it out, hair by hair. My wife, Julia Cindy, she says, you know that's a woman. Any man who did that would never be able to stand it. I said, you're right, dear. And then we were at the Parish Life Conference. We told Sayedna about this. And you know what his response was? He said, you don't have to tell the people all the details, our bishop. You don't have to tell the people all the details. Just tell them Mary of Egypt came home. That's enough. I said, okay. So on the day of her baptism, I said, I have an obedience from the bishop. I have to say that Mary of Egypt came home. Here she is. And I asked him, I said, are you experiencing a lot of this now in the Archdiocese? And he said, no, first case, Bonners Ferry. But, and I said in that first case that you know of. So this is going to be something. Well, I don't want to get off on that topic, but just to let you know, like, you see, when she found the church, and well, the first thing she said was, "You were kind." Like, why are you so kind? Because she had experienced nothing but like attacks and misery, and she was afraid of everybody, afraid of persecution. And like I said, her formation was terrible. Her parents destroyed her with the way she went through the sequence of life. So now she's just healing, she's looking every day like more feminine, like with beautiful, and she's wearing like skirts. I said, look at you, you're elegant. You're looking, this is the way God created you. And she's like weeping. What does it require? It requires the love of Christ. That's your job. You have no idea who's going to walk through this door any minute. The love of Christ. We embrace everything. Look who Christ embraced. He embraced every kind of sinful behavior, not behavior, but the person, and forgave the behavior when there was repentance. So she was so, like, I never saw a more repentant person. So, like it was a shot in the arm for me. I've been a priest like too many years, and now I say, wow, this was good for my life. It brought me back to life a little bit to see a person like that. Talk about the joy of Christ. Her first Pascha, she was like on the moon. Can you imagine how she was feeling? Like realizing that this is real life now. It doesn't have to be fake life that I'm trying to make all the answers up myself. Yeah. It doesn't happen every day, those kind of stories. Okay, so what we were talking about, like this idea of like living the fullness of the Christian love and the Christian life. That's why I love monasteries so much. Because people living in the monasteries are trying to live this way, giving everything to Christ, striving for God and His holiness 24/7. No matter what happens to them, they continue striving. I'll tell you a story of one of the sisters up in the monastery up in Goldendale. She came from our church, right? And to let you in on like how a parish priest meets a new person, she came and she had all the normal sort of stuff that goes on in the world, and she was in her 20s, I think. And when she came, it's easy to hear a confession like that because the priests in the parish, we're like general practitioners, But then when we go deeper, like I said, the deeper, and she was going very deep, very fast. And then she started talking about, I'm ready. I want to go to the monastery. I can't live in the world anymore. I just want to give my whole life. And I said, okay, we can explore that. But then the more she would come to confession, she would say, how about this? And I said, well, I don't really know. Why don't you ask the abbess, ask Yodontissa that question, and then tell me what she said. I want to learn too. And she would go from like every week, then to every 3 days going to confession, then to every day going to confession. And the more our confessions look more and more like this. Well, how about this, Father? I have this thought. And I said, well, I don't know. Ask Yodontissa. Well, how about this? I said, I don't know. Ask Yodontissa. And then eventually I just said, you know what? I'm no good to you. I'm no more good to you. I'm teaching you like chopsticks, and you need a Rachmaninoff concerto. Go and live there and stay there. And she did. She just moved very quickly past anything that the normal parish life could give her. You see, that's a possibility. I don't know if we're teaching our children that that's a possibility. Marriage is always a possibility, but how about to dedicate your life completely, undeniably, 100% to Christ our God? I think we forgot how to explore that more and more. And when I see her now, she has such joy. I always tease her, like she always has something to tell me. I said, for a nun, you have a lot of opinions. Do you really? She goes, oh, Father, I'm so sorry. Like, she folds up like some way. It's but every time I send people, or people go to the monastery, oh, by the way, when you see her, tell her to give you a word, And she hates that. She says, why is he always, I'm going to kill that priest. I said, oh? Yeah. No matter what happens, like in the monastery, it's a great place to see that. No matter what happens, they continue striving. Because their whole life is not centered on the things that change, think about the way you live. I'm taking a guess. The most important kind of aspects that we build our life around are job, income, we eat, we sleep, we work, we have entertainment, and then maybe if we have enough time, we pray. Just guessing. In the monastery, they pray, and they host visitors. You know, they're very big on hospitality, but they pray. And that never changes. Like this time, in stone. This time, in stone. And then the intrusions are the opposite of our intrusions. Their intrusions are eating, sleeping, having to do some work in the world, whatever they do. And it takes away from their prayer time. And they hate that. It's the exact opposite. Why don't we try to flip it around a little bit and at least dedicate more time to prayer and say, that's the center of my life. By the end of my life, I would like that to be more hours, and not to allow any disturbance to that. It's not impossible. If you have that mindset, if you really want that with all your heart, certainly by the time you retire, and certainly by the time you leave this life, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think heaven is like? It's prayer. You better get used to it here. It's worship. It's like praising God all the time. If we're not used to it here, how are you going to be used to it over there? You're going to say, I don't understand any of this. And therefore, maybe it's not for you. I don't think we think about, the depth like that. They do at the monastery. That's why I love them so much. I was at, and it's like this everywhere, wherever you go in the world. Like I went to Romania, gosh, it must be about a dozen years ago now. And everywhere you go, there's like, we went to every monastery. We just tried to stay off the beaten path and just stay in the church and stay out of the world. Because you can go any country and miss the jewels, miss the depth. But talk about hospitality. We went into one monastery just before the liturgy, right? And as a priest, I'm always busy, I'm always serving, I'm always active. So I went into the corner just to lay down, do a prostration, and stay there. It was dark. It was so nice. I had my son with me. He was off in the back. And I'm just laying there in this Romanian monastery in the middle of nowhere. And I said, how blessed, how joyful. And then what happened? A monk comes by me and he kicks me. Yeah, you weren't expecting that. He came right up to me and went, boom. Okay, I said, what? And he took a pillow and he threw it down to me. It's like, and I said, okay, thank you. That's hospitality, see? Romanian hospitality. So I loved it. It was just like I was filled with joy after that. Listen to what another thing Elder Joel says. He's very practical. He said, this one's called work and death. Father Joel worked ceaselessly, even though he had been attacked by... So, real love, and thus real joy, God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These three persons love each other immensely. That's who God is. God is love, and God is joy, and God is freedom. And so God creates everything and everyone, beginning with Adam and Eve, in love and in joy, including you. I want to remind you of that, because everything you do practically, it's either reflecting that, in other words, it's either consistent with that lifestyle, or it's not. So that's how God uses his freedom, to love, to create. And just like he knew what would happen to him when he came into this life with us, the bloody murder of the cross, for instance, he knows everything you've ever done. He knows everything that you're doing right now. He knows what you're thinking. He knows what's in your heart right now. And everything that you will ever do, he already knows. And he freely chooses to love us and to care for us even though, no matter what. Even though he knows us so well. Right? And that's why, like Peter, when Christ comes and, the fish on the right side of the boat, and you'll catch, and Peter says, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." Like he doesn't want the Lord to see him. Like to see who he is, like in his nakedness, right? Because the more we look at that, this is the temptation. When we look at our sinfulness, when we're first introduced to God, and then we look at ourselves, we see not a nice picture. And then most people just, like, they open up and they say, "Ah!" and they close it up. Your job is to open it up, let that healing light of Christ look at all those dark places. It reminds me of iodine. They don't use iodine anymore, to put on. I used to put it on my children's wounds, like they'd say, "Ah!" And I said, "This is really good for you." Right? And it's like that. You open up your soul, and then you say, "Ah! Look at this." And then little by little, Christ takes a little bit of, and you can't do it all at once. It's overwhelming to know who we really are. But it's authentic. It's transparent. Can you imagine if the whole world knew who you really were? Like all the things you've ever done, all your secrets, all your mysteries, all your sins. God knows them, and all he wants us to do is acknowledge those and learn them for ourselves, because you cannot know God until you know yourself. And you cannot know yourself completely until you know God. That's the mystery of, like, really looking deep. Do you know there's a miracle? St. Sabas says, here's the miracle. It's greater miracle to know yourself than to raise somebody from the dead. That's how far away we are from this self-knowledge, this self-awareness of who we really are. Because when you acknowledge that, you don't stay there. You don't stay in the depression and in the suicidal thoughts and in the addictions and all that. You give that to God. There's only one thing that we can give to God that he hasn't given us first. Do you know what that is? Your sin. He hasn't given you your sin. You've freely chosen to create those. But he wants them. He wants you to give them to him. Why? So that he can, in return, pour the oil of his mercy over you and heal all those broken places and go into all those deep chambers that sometimes we didn't even know existed, and open them up, and little by little, he can only go to the places that you let him in. He won't go to the place that you forbid him to go. So don't forbid him to go anywhere. No secrets from God. And that's what he wants. Because many people, they say, well, that sin is too great to be forgiven. Or that's not really a sin. Or I've heard a million of them. And say, so why are you holding your sin, like clutching it like this? Because as long as you do that, it's yours. And it'll be yours forever. The minute you let it go like this and give it to God, right? Now you can do something creative with it. What do you mean creative with my sin? Yes. He wants them. He wants you to give them to him repentantly. Say, Lord, forgive me for that. And he accepts them. And he gives you his body and blood in return.
I have a question. Now, like when we pray, and certain times when we pray, we really feel that joy. At the same time, thoughts might come that says, okay, the more you're closer to God, the more you hear or you feel that the devil will attack you more. And or maybe it will attack the beloved ones in your family. How can we deal with that thoughts that brings us fear at the same time? How can we get rid of those?
Did everybody hear the question? How can we deal with the temptations that come when we're praying and we say, oh, but maybe the devil will attack us or our family or do something if we get closer to God? Well, the choice is very clear. We could live in fear. How do you think that would look if our whole life is like lived in fear? Many people live that way, by the way. Or we can go back to the basics of this talk and we can live in love. which means I'm not thinking about myself anymore. I have to stop thinking about like my self-interest. See, it's hard for us even to get that concept because we say, if I do this, this will happen to me. Or if I do this, some crazy thing's going to happen to my family, right? Like we say back east, forget about it. Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Lord, I love you. I trust you. I give my life to you. Let whatever happens in this life happen. Because it's going to happen anyway. I have news for you, my dears. Tragedies happen to Christians and to non-Christians, to serious Orthodox Christians and to not serious Orthodox Christians. They happen. The enemy has some control over that. God has given him some freedom to tamper with our lives, you know. We have cancer, we have crime, we have, you know, our children, like I was telling you last night, doing things that we would never dream that they would ever have done, etc., etc. So we could either be afraid of all of that. I don't know how you're going to protect against it. You're just going to somehow give in to fear, and it's just going to grow and grow, and you're going to be a crazy person. Or you're going to let the love of God calm you down so that you can actually be an instrument of healing for your family when the catastrophes inevitably do happen. Don't you want to be a person that's able to help them? Or do you want to be one that jumps? We had a bishop, Bishop Jovan, the Serbian bishop. He was down here in California. You remember him, the Serbian bishop, Jovan? He gave us a nice talk one time. And he said, you know, if a man needs help, he falls into a hole. A man falls into a hole. And if he needs help, or wants to be helped, and you want to help him, you can do one of two things. You could either throw in the rope and help him, like from your vantage point with the rope, or you could jump in the hole with him if you want to help him. So what are you going to do? Jump in the hole with him? Then neither of you are any good to each other or anybody. And this is what we do when we go into the problem of the other person, like we have nothing to give them, except if you're at the high place of love of God and trust in God and love of other people. Now I have something to offer. If they take it, they take it. If they don't, they don't. I can't do their part, right? But I can do my part. But even to get to that place, I have to be like already in this love of God. I have to be a man of prayer. I have to be a man that can offer them something. I have to be able to teach them joy. Isn't that the topic of this whole talk? I have to be able to give them joy in the midst of them falling into a hole. I have to be able to impart that joy to them still, even at that dark time. That's the ability that Christ gives you when you partake fully of this life. And proportionately, if you partake partially of this life or a little bit more, whatever, that's the amount of joy you're going to have. So let's just say that it's like an inverse proportion. The more joy I have, the less fear I'll have. The more fear I have, the less joy I'll have. How's that? That's the math. Spiritual math. Who has a, yeah.
You mentioned it yesterday when you were talking about Elder Porphyrios, that he didn't say to fight evil. He said to just open your heart and love God.
Yeah.
And that'll take care of itself. So that goes along
Yeah.
with it.
Were you here last night? So, to turn towards Christ, St. John Chrysostom says it the best. Let me see if I can remember this. He's talking about the Beatitude where, you know the Beatitudes where Christ says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You've heard this Beatitude, right? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Nothing more joyful than that. He says, those who are pure in heart, who are always looking at God, who are always seeing God, even when they look at evil, they don't recognize it. You see that baby who was baptized today? That baby could look directly at the most evil thing, wouldn't know what to do with it, wouldn't know anything about it. You have to become like that baby if you want to see God. Like I was saying in the teaching today, she's sleeping with the angels now. She's seeing heaven. She's experiencing the kingdom of God. And we touch her to get a little bit of that grace, you know. If she's there and she doesn't understand anything, so to speak, she understands everything. You and I don't understand anything because We think, oh, that's evil, that's good. We make judgments about everything rather than simply being calm, being quiet, being loving, being sad. Being sad is not a sin. Christ was sad when Lazarus died. He wept over the whole condition of death and all of that. But the difference is he never took it personally. He never put it into his heart in the form of depression or frustration or anything selfish. He never thought of himself. But he was sad. He lamented over the condition of the whole world, right? But he never lived in that place of fear, which is always trying to guard and protect our own interests, right? So when you look at Elder Porphyrios' teaching, his idea is, why even look at that stuff? Why even look at all the evil around us? Look at Christ. Otherwise, you will go mad, or you will get depressed, or you will get so frustrated, and it comes out in a million different ways. How many times people confess, I snapped at my spouse, Well, what did they do? They did nothing. It was insignificant, but I was frustrated. I was frustrated by something that happened to me during the course of my day or whatever. And it came out like that, like a snap. Well, why did you look at it? Why did you pay attention to that? Why did you face that rather than just facing Christ? And then when you see your spouse for the first time in the day, you look at him or you look at her and you say, you are the face of Christ in my life today. And don't you think that you'll be more intimate with your spouse then? You give them a big kiss and you don't dump on them all the dirt from the day. God forbid we do that to our children. We do that to each other. Why? They don't need that. They need life to be like a person who has the life of Christ in them. So you have a choice. You have a lot of choices, and here's one. The choice is, I can let everything externally, all the influences of my life outside of me, affect my heart, change my mood, right? Good mood, bad mood. I mean, my gosh, I live in Idaho and it's probably gray today up there, and it's maybe snowing. And if I would let the weather, for instance, affect I'd be like gloomy. I'm not doing the liturgy today. Why? It's raining. This is how ridiculous letting the outside influences. I had a bad day with my boss. Somebody smashed into my car at the Kmart parking lot. Who cares? All of that is incidental to what? If I have Christ in my heart, the love of Christ in my heart, it's like a little fortress. And no one can go there. No one can disturb that unless you allow it. St. John Chrysostom said, no one can injure the person who doesn't injure themselves. But we do. We let other influences get in there. Now look at the opposite. Look at how the saints respond. Why do we like to go visit saints and holy people and people that we trust? It's because they do the opposite. In their heart is the love of Christ. In their heart is the impenetrable divinity of God, and they treasure it like you would treasure like a fortune. And therefore, when they go out into the world, that shines out onto all their circumstances, onto their fellow employees, onto their bosses, onto their teachers, whatever circumstance they're in. That's what goes out. The world doesn't influence their heart because Christ is filling it, so there's no room for the world to influence that. Instead, they pour all of that out, that love, onto the world. And it's an amazing difference. People actually can change. You know what St. Paisius said? Even a positive thought, like a positive prayerful energy that we give to someone, like when you're praying for someone by name, you take them, you put them in your heart, and then you pray for them there, and you're together. He said, that affects your heart, but it also affects them. There's like this beautiful divine energy that goes into them. And it just changes. And I've heard people say, I felt your prayers. And I never quite knew what that meant. I felt your prayers. But it literally means that this is a tangible grace of God. It's his presence that comes into somebody else. But the same, by the way, is true for the opposite. If you have a negative thought against someone, God forbid, you affect them negatively. You can actually harm someone with your thoughts. That's how we're all interrelated. And that's a very serious question. So use the power that Christ gives you for the good, for the blessing, for the joy, if you will. If you have joy and you're thinking and praying for all these names, you have a big list of names like in a notebook, I hope, that you pray for by name every day if possible, and you have joy when you're doing it, it's going to change all of their lives. It's going to make them different because of your thoughts. That's it.
I was just thinking, what you and I were having a conversation. Expectations gets in the way. Sometimes we pray with expectations. We go to church with expectations. We enter into relationships with expectations, and we turn to God ourselves with expectations that something will happen, but that steals the joy from us because our expectations isn't necessarily what God desires.
Remember what I said even at the beginning of this talk. Expect nothing. Expect nothing. Our job is not to do God's part. God knows every human heart. You have no idea what's going on in somebody else's life. Do you want to hear another story about that? Talking about the pastoral life. On Wednesday, we just buried somebody, a beautiful old soul. She was 76 years old, but she didn't become Orthodox until she was 72. She had been to every church. I think she was brought up maybe Lutheran. And she went to the Mennonite church, went to the Presbyterians, the Baptists. She tried the Baptists a few times, and she was never fed. They were always, I don't know how to say it, they were always mean to her. Everybody was mean to this poor gal. She had no family. And so, believe it or not, she was friends with one of the Baptist pastors in our town, Bonners Ferry. And she called him and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just in despair. I can't. And he said, why don't you try the Orthodox Church? The Baptist pastor. Why don't you try the Orthodox Church? Seems like nice people, So she did. And she called me up. And this woman was tough. The first question she says, do you believe in abortion and homosexuality? I said, well, hello. I do believe that they exist, yes. But you don't want to hear that answer, right? She was like, well, what do you... I said, no, we are the Church of Life, an authentic life. And if you come and see, then you'll see how much we love Christ and love life. And she never looked back, and she was so excited. And she started coming to all the Seekers classes. We baptized her. And then she started coming to all the Seekers classes even after that. Like I would start new cycles with all new people, and she was at every one of them, all of these. Amazing woman. And then one time, in one of those Seekers classes, one time she heard the gospel after Pascha, the gospel of the Samaritan woman. You remember the woman at the well? And where Christ reads into her soul, and she says, I don't have a husband. He said, you've had 5 husbands. And soon after that, she says, Father, I have to see you. I have to have a confession. I have to have a life confession. I said, but we did that. Remember when you first came into the church? I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what sin was. I don't know. Give me 5 hours. So we went on, and she had a little unfinished cabin. She worked hard. She was alone her whole life. Really. And when I tell you, you'll understand. She had a little unfinished cabin, and we sat on the porch of that unfinished cabin and had a 5-hour confession. And she went through her whole life. She heard that gospel. She had 5 husbands. And they beat her up in different degrees. They beat her to a pulp. They stole her fortune. How many times she had to start over again, and one after the other after the other. I mean, I was in tears listening to her life. And then I understood, why she was so, tough. Like you would say, that's a crabby old woman. You have no idea what her life was like. And I just preached that at the funeral. I didn't tell the people everything, but at the funeral I said, this life is an amazing life. It's a privilege for a priest to be present when a person is presenting that life to Christ and saying, what do I do with this, Lord? You know, and she was frustrated by that. But you wouldn't see it on the surface. I mean, she had guns all over the house. She was ready to blow anybody away that would come to her property. She had big dogs. My gosh. I'm surprised I survived to go on the property. But you know what? But the minute we let her into our life, especially this one Romanian family that took her under their wing and she just loved them, she melted. She became like a little girl again, which probably is where she still was, like in terms of the fact she never got loved. She tried to have marriages. You see? You see the human wreck of misery that surrounds us? And they're all around you right here in all of these houses. Nobody has joy. They have some substitute for it. Maybe it's guns, ready to, well, she was actually, what did she tell me? She was a one-room schoolhouse teacher out in a remote Washington state, and somebody went into her house, right, and tried to rob her or do something. And she, whatever room she was in, she had a gun in every room. And she said, okay, get outside, go on the front lawn, and lay down. And then she called the sheriff, and he came and locked the guy up. So that's her answer to the misery that people gave her. I can't blame her for that. I can't, I can try to help her heal from that. And we did. And how did we do it? By just loving her. I mean, we just loved her so much. And she wasn't used to it. She goes, I don't know how to deal with this. Please myself and like say, okay, I'm going to have a beautiful steak today. No matter what day it is. It's Holy Friday and I'm eating steak. It doesn't make sense to us. All right? So, in general, the idea is to love others more than you love yourself, right? That's an ascetic exercise. If you can't, like let's say you get sick and you can't fast. So you tell Father John you can't fast. I can't, I have to have a piece of Limburger cheese every day or something. I don't know. Ew. That's why I chose that. Right? And he says, okay, you can do that. You can have a piece of cheese every day, right? But instead, now you have to replace that with, that one person that aggravates you all the time and makes you miserable and frustrates you. That person, now you have to love them more than yourself. Every day you eat a piece of cheese, you have to love them more than yourself. And you have to go outside of yourself to be nice to them that day, genuinely, authentically. Otherwise, no cheese. Okay, there's kind of a direct correlation, right? We have to give God something. Better to love them than to not eat a piece of cheese. But, this part of the ascetic life, I think we forgot. The whole idea of that it's all based on love. It's all driven by love, by the love of Christ, right? It takes effort. It takes work. It takes spiritual struggle to go out of your way to love somebody who bugs you or who has irritated you. Why do they irritate you? I mean, how can anybody irritate us if we don't allow them to? I'm going to go back to the example of St. Nephon. Maybe I never even talked about I was going to talk about St. Nephon and somebody asked the question. Oh, no, I did. That's the one who could see their faces get black, Okay. But St. Nephon, when he would greet people, he would do a prostration in front of them. Even somebody he didn't know. He would see them on the streets in Cyprus, fall down and say, your servant Nephon greets you. Can you imagine? If somebody did that on the streets of LA, you'd run. You shouldn't. If somebody does that, it's a beautiful thing. We do that with each other here in the church on Forgiveness Sunday and any other day. So he got too old. He became the bishop, by the way. He was consecrated the bishop. And even when he was the bishop, he would do that. Now, what if the bishop did that in front of you? What would you do? You'd fall down. You better. But what's the difference? Well, anyway, that's another question. So when he got too old to do that, to fall down in front of other people. He couldn't, his legs, whatever. So he, in his mind, had a picture. And the picture was, he had the back of his neck underneath the heel of their shoe. When he was talking to them, greeting them with joy, he had this image that he was underneath their feet and they were stepping on the back of his neck. Now you tell me, do you think he ever could offend anybody with that mindset? Or do you think anybody would ever be able to offend him? Would he ever allow that to happen? This is joy. He had joy. I've heard it put a different way. If you have humility, you will never be humiliated. Do you know what that means? If you have humility, no one can hurt you, no one can harm you. They'll say anything about you, you'll say, well, that's true. I am the village idiot. You're right. Let me think about that a little bit. Or thank you. Thank you for telling me that. I forgot what a goof I really was until you reminded me of that. This idea of humbling ourselves in front of people, it's a lost spiritual art. We hold grudges for a long time. I remember my first parish in Pennsylvania. We had an old mountain of a man. He was a big Russian guy. Mike was his name, Big Mike. And he was like the janitor, he maintenance man. He did everything in the church. He fixed everything. He was huge, like hands like iron. And one day his brother died, Charlie. His brother Charlie. And his brother Charlie didn't go to our church. He was a member of the Roman Catholic Church. So I went to the funeral out of respect for Mike and out of love for him. And at the grave, right at the end, after the priest finished, the Catholic priest finished whatever he was doing, and I'm standing there, I'm ready to talk to Mike a little bit, and he's like sobbing over the grave of his brother Charlie, sobbing, big tears, like, oh, Charlie, like this. And I said, oh, Mike, you really loved your brother. You were close. And he said, Father, we had not spoken in 35 years. We had a grudge. We had like a broken relationship. And now is the first time I'm seeing him in 35 years. And look where he is. This is how we live somehow. This is acceptable somehow to us. I don't know how that fits with the gospel. How does that fit with receiving the holy mysteries when I have some big grudge? Now, granted, sometimes you have to be able to realize that that person has a grudge against me, but I extend every opportunity for forgiveness, for healing. Please forgive me. I was like the worst person. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what was on my mind. Forgive me. If they don't forgive you then, well, then that's their part. But you have to do your part. We have to do some little bit of Christian living. Otherwise, I tell you the truth, you'll never have joy. If you have a grudge, if you have a brokenness in your family, or with someone that you have known, and then a big violent break, and people just, what they do is they tear that page out of their phone book and throw it away. And they say, well, I'm finished with that one now. What? You see, that's the worldview that says I'm important, and if they can't make up with me, forget it. Or they've offended me and I won't speak to them again. This is not our way. It's not in your tradition to do that. Your tradition is to take them, put them in your heart, and they're on your list forever. If nothing else, that deep prayer list, and maybe some special prayers with tears. Take them and put them in your heart as you're praying for them. Because oftentimes when people say, I'll pray for you, it's kind of like a brush off. I'll pray for you, You're terrible. I'll pray for you. Because we leave them out there. Even if they have cancer, even if they have like some big problem. Oh, okay, I'll pray for you. But there's still a distance between us. This is not real prayer. We have to literally take them and put them right here in our heart and pray for them and for us together, as if they were like my bosom companion, because they are. St. Maximus the Confessor says, you cannot love God more than you love your worst enemy. What does that mean? My prayer won't go very far. If my worst enemy, in other words, if I have seething resentment, even hatred, if I can't stand somebody, that's about as much as you can love God. It's impossible. St. John in the epistle says, how can you say you love God, who you have not seen? And you can't even love this one in front of you, who you see every day, and who bothers you. Come on. And we all fall that way. But the biggest sin is not the fall, it's the not getting up again. If you want joy, go to confession. Do you want joy? Ask somebody for forgiveness. Do you want the real joy of the Holy Trinity? Have no ego about anything that anybody says or does to you. That's Christianity. That's basic Christianity. I'll tell you a story. Do you like stories? Or do you like, okay. Thank God, because just ask my wife. Oh yeah, he's full of them. So, when I was in Pennsylvania, he was a good bishop. My bishop in the OCA. I was in the OCA in the early years. One time I said something about him. One time I said something like against him, and he wasn't there. And you know what? The minute I said it, it was like an arrow went through my heart. I said, oh, what did I do? What have I done? So I called him right up. I said, Your Grace, I have to come and see you right now. And he said, come on. And it wasn't like now. Can you imagine now? I have to fly to New Jersey. But it was like an hour and a half, so I drove up, and I'm feeling terrible. And I walk into the office, and I said, forgive me, Your Grace. I had a bad thought about you. I said something bad, and then I was going down on the floor, like to do this prostration in front of him. What did he do? He jumped on the floor in front of me. He did a prostration in front of me first, before I could even hit the floor. He was on the floor. And he said, those things happen. You tell me, is that the kind of bishop you want? I always had good bishops. I only had him and Bishop Joseph, now Metropolitan Joseph, two authentic men who are humble, who can teach us by their, just by their way, more than their words, more than all the sermons in the world, just by doing like an act like that. Amazing. This is how we learn the faith. And he always, he had joy. This bishop, it was Bishop Herman, by the way. He's still alive, Metropolitan Herman. So that's how I learned the faith. You know how I learned how to give confession, like how to like say a confession of my own life? From you, from people. Over the years, you'll see this. Sometimes people are confessing their sins with deep humility and authenticity. And I say, man, this person confesses their sins way better than I do. Look how deep they are. They can dance spiritual circles around me. It's authentic, And yet they're still expecting me to give them a little teaching, a little guidance, right? And I say, man, do I have a long way to go? That's how you learn in our tradition. You learn by either being humiliated or by acquiring humility. Just trying to be like out of the limelight, out of the spotlight. Not important. Christ is important. Other people are important. Living the life of service to God and to other people is so important. It's what brings joy. God recognizes that. Even if nobody else does. Like this little lady that I told you about that we just buried. She was pretty unknown in the world. And yet, I see elements in her life of what they call fool for Christ. That mysterious category of people who either pretended to be crazy or really had some craziness to them, and they offered even their lunacy to God. Whatever you have, whoever you are, if you really want to live the authentic life, offer whoever that is to God. But first of all, you have to find out who that is. That's what brings joy. Okay, so the things I'm saying here, it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it's hard work, it's an effort, it's struggle. The reason we say it's struggle is because it doesn't please, our fallen egos. Because we want to be pampered, we want to be pleased, we want to be served, we want to be ministered to. We do. But the effort is to go against that, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's the easiest thing in the world. It's exactly what Christ meant when he said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. But it's still a burden, but it's light. But it's still a burden, but it's joyful. It's light. Take up the burden, right? Okay, I have a couple of stories, but I'm going to take the question next. Okay. I can't hear you, my dear.
You mentioned the fallen ego.
The fallen ego, the ego in general is fallen.
That made me think about how do you deal with the other side of pride, with the other side. So we talk a lot, and usually we talk a lot about self-love. But what about self-criticism, self-hatred? Because I see a lot of this, and I think this is sometimes more prevalent.
Beautiful question. Everybody get the question? What about self-criticism? What about self-hatred? What about self-loathing, leading to suicide, leading to a million problems? Good question. I heard a great definition of humility once. I think I heard it on the radio, actually, believe it or not. I don't like to acknowledge that I get my theology from the radio, but it was this. Humility is not thinking little of yourself. It's thinking of yourself a little. Let me explain that. The flip side of pride, the other side of the same exact coin is self-loathing or depression or whatever. Because both sides of that coin are consumed and preoccupied with what? Me! So you got to put all of that aside. So, what's the alternative? My preoccupation needs to be Christ. My preoccupation needs to be my spouse. When young couples come and they want to get married, and I'm getting so bad at this. I always say, okay, why do you want to get married? And they say, you know what they always say? Believe it or not, they say, well, Father, we love each other. And I say, oh my gosh, how disgusting. I said, what in the world do you even mean by that? And well, I don't know. Exactly. Okay. Okay, let me ask you another question. Why do you want to get married in the church? My mom and dad want me to get married in the church. I said, do you really want to have a meeting with me right now? Because you're not going to like the next thing I say. And that thing is, look, there's only one reason that I would ever tolerate the two of you getting married in the church. Otherwise, you could go get married, jump out of a hot air balloon, or get married underwater, or whatever people are doing these days. They're not even getting married these days, tell you the truth, under a certain age. You are getting married to save each other's souls. Your job is to save your spouse's soul, and your job is to save your spouse's soul. And you're through this crucible. Can you imagine? So, what would you do? What would you do? Like, many people would fall into despair, have become victims, whatever. Because of Vasily, because of his love for God, he said, okay, it is the will of God that I never see my wife and my child again. And I'm sure he prayed for them for the rest of his life. But he went into the monastery. He says, so I'm not going to get married again. How can I? My life now will be dedicated completely to God. So he went to the monastery. And he became there a diligent laborer, and they ordained him priest, and he eventually became superior. And he was amazing. He had gifts, and he did healings, right? This is having joy in the middle of suffering. he lost his family. You could either choose one of two things. A lot of people choose throwing God away and saying, how could you do this to me, God? Blaming God. What, you don't think that happens? That happens all the time. Just when one little setback happens. Much less, I lost my whole family because of political circumstances. Instead, he chose to joyfully, see what I mean when we say joyful suffering or sorrowful joy? He lived his whole life in that place of sorrowful joy after that. But the point is, he lived it. He actually authentically went there and was with Christ and didn't blame God for anything. And he said, I will see them again, not in this life. I will see them in the next life. To have that kind of love, to have that kind of faith. This is what gives us joy. This is what gives us hope. And it's all based on the love that we have for Christ. When I was in Russia the first time, I went in 1989, when it was still teetering. The Soviet Union was still in existence. It was teetering. And the priest I was with, my classmate, Father Mark, he's been the chaplain of a women's monastery in Pennsylvania forever. So we went to Russia, and we met there in one of these little out-of-the-way churches. A very educated engineer, and his son, 12-year-old, Dmitry. Dmitry and his father were living in the church, like living or next to the church or something, because his father was very high in the Communist Party, right? He was a minister in the Communist Party, but then he decided he wanted to go to church. He wanted to worship. So he took his son Dmitry and they went to church, and eventually they found out, and he was thrown out of his job, thrown out of the Communist Party, no way to make a living, nothing. And so they turned to the church completely. So when I met Demetrius, I'll never forget, I've never seen a 12-year-old quite like this. His eyes were so pure, they were piercing, but you could already see the suffering. He was always smiling, but you could see the suffering in his eyes, because they tried to keep sending him to school, and everybody made fun of him. The teacher said, Dmitry is a Christian. He believes in Jesus Christ, that he's God. And they would all laugh at him, throw things at him. They sat him in the front of the class on a stool with a big hat, one of these big caps like that, and said, there's Dmitry, he's a Christian. So his father said, okay, let's just stay in the church. We won't even go to school. But perfect English, like he spoke with like a British accent. His English was better than mine. We brought these little paper icons, big stack of them to hand out, and we gave them a few. I said, hand them out. And he said, pardon me, Father, but have these holy icons been blessed by the sanctified water? I said, oh my gosh, in America, you give a paper icon, so they throw it in a drawer somewhere, This is authenticity. It takes a little bit of suffering like that, a little bit of, testing of the faith for them to become like, whoa, these people are on fire. Their whole job was lighting the lamps in the church, sweeping the floor, cleaning, staying in the church all the time. And they were so happy. I never saw happier father and son. And this kid was 12 years old. Just imagine. I don't know. Compared to some 12-year-olds that we've seen here in America, I think I'd probably choose that for my 12-year-old, given everything else being equal, Now that doesn't sound like joy to me, does it? That's authentic joy. They literally were forced to make a choice, to throw off this life with all of its power and prestige and whatever, and to settle, quote unquote, for life in the church. I don't know. To me, the choice is pretty clear. What's preventing us from that? Fear. Categories that we live by. judgmentalism, you know, like, what will people think of me? That's kind of reverse judgmentalism. What will people think of me if I don't want to be humiliated. The saints never cared about being humiliated, and they always defended those who were being humiliated. I'll give you an example. You know the Saint Dorotheus? You know Saint Dorotheus of Gaza? He's like a comedian saint. You know, he told stories that would make you laugh. So Saint Dorotheus tells the story one time of an abbot of a monastery named Ammon. Ammon, Saint Ammon. And one time, the brothers in the monastery, they saw one of the monks bring a woman into the monastery. Such a scandal, and they were like all crazy. Even in the monastery, they get a little bit crazy when they forget who they really are supposed to be. And they went running to the abbot, Ammon. Abba, so-and-so has brought a woman into the monastery. What are we going to do about it? It's impossible. You can see a lot of joy there, right? So the abbot, you know what he said to them? He had a lot of wisdom and spiritual insight. He said, I don't believe you. I don't believe what you're saying. Show me, right? So they were so only too glad to march down to the room. But Ammon, because he was so wise, he's making a big noise on the way down with his feet like this, so that the brother would hear. And have you ever seen a cell of a monk in the monastery? They have like a chair, maybe a bed, maybe like a table, not too much. So he had little pieces, 2-3 pieces of furniture, and he had, for some reason, there was a barrel in the middle of the room, right? So he said, they go into the room, the monk tells the woman, go underneath the barrel, because the only place he had to hide her in the room, right? So Ammon comes in and promptly plops down on the barrel. He sits right on the barrel like this, and he says, brother, these brothers have accused you of having a woman in the room. I told them that they have my blessing to search it. So go find your woman. So, there's not too many places to look in a little cell like that. They looked under the bed, and maybe they looked under the chair. Then they went back and they looked under the bed again, and they would never tell the abbot, get off the barrel, Abba, we want to look under there. Move. No. They were, thank God they were wise enough not to do that. And they said, Abba, we saw him come in here, but we can't find her. And he said, shame on you for accusing your brother. Shame on you. Now, it was a true accusation, but it was still a shame because they did it. Shame on you for accusing your brother. Go and do 5 million prostrations, whatever it was. Go. Get out of my sight. And then what did he say to the brother? Now, I love this. It reminds me of, remember when the woman was caught in adultery, and then he who has no sin cast the first stone. And then afterwards he says to the woman caught in adultery, he says, woman, is anyone here to accuse you? And she looked around, they were all gone. She said, nobody, no man, Lord, no man. And he said, now just imagine, from the giver of life, to hear this word, well then neither do I accuse you. Go and sin no more. Neither do I accuse you. That's your God, right? So Ammon looks at the brother, and all he did, he looked him right in the eye, and he said, brother, look to yourself. And he left. Do you think that guy ever brought a woman in the room? Brother, look to yourself. Can we learn how to be gentle with each other, even in the midst of a horrible sin or a horrible problem? I wonder what's made us so harsh that in the church, we forgot how to just, grab our sister, our brother, and say, I love you. Just don't have to say anything. Just look to yourself. And I love you no matter what. No matter what. In the church. I have news for you. If we can't say it to each other in the church, how are we ever going to say it out there? How are we ever going to have joy for them out there? How are we ever going to bring those broken and battered and beat up people from out there into this church? It'll never happen until we have that heart that can receive them, right? They need to see a healed heart before they'll come into this church. They need to see joy. Do you want to go to a church where everybody's dismal? Walking around like with frowns on their face, crying in the yard, do you want to see like sadness and, I mean the kids, it's one thing, but what about us? We're crying, we're depressed, we're sad, I want to see joy when I go to church. Don't you? Do you ever look out when you're about to give a sermon and look at your people? Sometimes I just stand there like this. And I said, there's not one of you smiling. Nobody's smiling in this church. Why? You're depressing me. You're all making me like sad. This is the Lord's day. It's, Christmas Day. And we're sitting, oh no, here comes another sermon.
It's the 15-minute nap time.
Father,
Sorry, Steve.
Have we touched a nerve here today? To have joy means you can't even think an evil thought about anybody. Like, do you know Papa Nicholas Planas? Have you ever taught Father John? Have you ever taught Papa Nicholas Planas's life here?
No.
So he was a married priest. It's so interesting. I can count on one hand the number of married priests who've become saints. I wonder why that is. I don't mean martyrs or like some other category. Just like there's St. John of Kronstadt, Papa Nicholas Planas, maybe one other. Not too many more, right? Okay, well, that's another retreat. But Papa Nicholas Planas, he was so beloved of his people and very special, very spiritually gifted. And he served liturgy every day of his life, every day of his life. Even during Great Lent, he served the Presanctified every day of his life. So he would start like his rhythm about 2 a.m. with his prayer, and then go right through the whole cycle in the church. And then like about maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, he was finished with everything. Then people would come with their memorial services, with their prayer services, then he would pray more till about 2 o'clock for them, for the people. And then finally he would visit the hospitals, and he would go home about maybe 5 o'clock. And then his wife would have the one meal that he ate during the day, and he would start preparing again, take a few hours sleep, and then 12 o'clock, midnight again, he'd wake up and start every day of his life. Who could disturb such a life? Anyway, so he never wanted to accuse anyone. His subdeacon, Timothy, listen to this. His subdeacon used to, like they would always stuff money in his pockets, like always the priest has a million pockets, like I never know what I'm going to find in these pockets. And they would always stuff money in after he prayed for their loved ones, whatever, something like that. And his chanter, his subdeacon, would come and take the money out of the priest's pocket. And Papa Nicholas was just too pure. He would never accuse him. You know what he would say? His name was Demetrius. He said, "Oh, Demetrius, you're tickling me, just like that. And that was the end of that. But one time, because he was so beloved of his people, his brother priests, clergy, accused him in front of the archbishop, or to the archbishop, about this, and it was all slander, and it was all lies, just like St. Nectarius, But the bishop called him in the office, and he said, "Brother so-and-so is saying this about you, that you've done this, and that you're," he goes, "Oh, your eminence, you must be mistaken. He would never say such a thing. He has a beautiful heart. He's a good man. He's good. This one's good. Everybody's good. Next you'll be telling me the devil is good." And he said, "The devil? He's the best. The devil is the best." And the bishop's like blowing he said, "The best? What do you mean he's the best? And he says, no, without him, nobody would be saved. He's the best one. I want to think like that. I would like a heart like that. That even when somebody accuses me, I don't even recognize it. I don't even understand it. To live like that, it's to live like outside of this realm, isn't it? Do we think like that? Can you go there? Try it. Try it. Try to get beyond like the fallenness and all the junk we're falling into all the time. Because if we don't, you'll never have a minute of joy. You'll say, joy to the world, and you'll have all these grudges. Joy to the world, and this guy who's doing this over here will aggravate me. Joy to the world, and then somebody backs into me in the parking lot, and I get out and I start screaming at them. Joy to the world, you know? It's precisely when things are going wrong here that all of this sort of prep work, all of this sort of working on my virtuous life, working on my life in Christ, that's when it gets used. That's when we use the tools that we've been praying for. That's when we use the tools that we've been growing, and it's in the peaceful times, so that you don't react, ever, when anything happens. Then you'll be a real person, an authentic person who can handle any catastrophe in this life. Otherwise, we'll be just as miserable as the guy who falls into the hole. And we'll be right there with him.
Can we take a break?
They don't need anything. They're not of this world anymore. They don't need anything. How long? How long?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. Because of my weakness, we'll say 15 minutes.
There's more food. There's restrooms are over here. There's coffee. The small one is caffeinated coffee. Please help yourself.
I wouldn't